all about New Zealand, freelancing, and remembering your joy with Colin Forbes-Abrams. Stay inspired. Playing second bassoon and the role of the second bassoonist and what makes a good section player in an orchestra.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of it's a very specific question, I guess, as well, to which orchestra you're playing for, and sort of, I guess it depends on the repertoire. It's a lot. So for me, second bassoon was always a natural. I mean, it's not that I was pigeonholed as a second bassoon, but, got even through high school, Jane Kircher-Lindner was at Burnside with me, and then she went on to, she went up to Manhattan School, and then she was principal soon at APO, and then now she's principal in Perth. And I just I was just naturally submissive to Jane. Like, I just think I was always raised by quite strong female characters, and I enjoyed it never bothered me, as we talked about the other day. Like, I don't see second bassoon as inferior. It's just different. But yeah, so I've always been quite a submissive musician, and I like being that foundation of the woodwind chord and the sort of relationship that a second bassoon has with, the lower brass and the horns and the basses. I kind of like not being the star, because I'm sort of like a big personality in my normal life. So, being, and I'm not saying that in the orchestra that I'm not a big personality, but like, I think it's really important to understand that it's not about you. It's actually, I actually had this conversation with Louise the other day after a concert, and I sort of said to her, I hope she doesn't get mad at me for saying this, but I said, Louise, there's this bit in that Rachmaninoff symphony where I really need you to just like put down those, she plays cor anglais, I really need you to just put down those notes at the start of it. She's like, well, my part says PP. And I'm just like, regardless, that's great, but you are actually the only person playing there, and I really need your support to know where I put my offbeats, and so I'm always have been super aware of what I'm doing and how it's contributing to everybody else. And I'm not saying that people aren't doing things, like say the timpani, for example, in the Rite of Spring, which we just did the other week. I was like, man, that's just got to be right, like it's just got to be bang on the money, not because that person needs to show off how great they are with their rhythm, but because we all need that to be right there for us to be able to react and to do what we need to do, or to feel like we're in the right place. That last page of Rite of Spring is like a clusterfuck if you don't, if it doesn't, sorry, excuse my language, if it doesn't sort of, all line up. And I guess second bassoon, the wind section is super curious. It's the string section they all play the same thing. They all play a bow on a string. The brass section, they're different sizes and different shapes and things, but they all play that same mouthpiece style of an instrument. Whereas, like, we've got a flute which blows over something, we've got a clarinet which has got a single reed, and then we've got the oboe and the bassoon which have double reeds. What a, like, colourful part of the orchestra. Who doesn't love the wind section? But anyway, the bassoon, especially the second bassoon, or, in a larger work, the contrabassoon or third and fourth bassoon, they just provide that foundation of all that colour, and so the job of the second bassoon is, this is just from my own experience. What do I know, really? But apart from what I've done, and that is to be super self-aware of knowing that it's not just about you, and it's not just about your principal, even though, you're naturally submissive to them and you want them to shine as well. But, like, you are foundation of the woodwind chord. It's really interesting. Like, have you played a Beethoven symphony recently?
Yes.
It's, I just forget sometimes. Maybe I don't. Maybe it just delights me every time, because the second bassoon's always kind of like the third. Like, it's always like, like the viola line, the inner line. And I just actually find, I used to find Beethoven really hard. I was like, why am I struggling with this so much? And then I realized, it's just because I'm the third, and I've got to like constantly adapt and change. And so, yeah, that's another whole experience. So when I talk about foundation of the woodwind chord, I am meaning in just sort of like quite generalized terms. Mm-hmm. Sometimes second bassoon is like the star of the show, isn't it?
Something that comes to mind, we just did playing Figaro, and how with the second bassoon we do have some solos by ourselves, and how, yes, it may be marked. I appreciate you sharing the story with Louise, where it's like it was hard because you see pianissimo, and maybe like when you're practicing, you're finding like the limits of that, of the reed, but actually that part may need to be heard a bit more. So maybe it's a bit more around mezzo forte just to help kind of the line. And also with chords, that sometimes it might be marked pianissimo, but you might have to put that kind of beanbag sound more at a
well, you might need to it needs to balance, like everything and I mean it needs to balance within the whole as well. I mean, pianissimo, like a solo pianissimo, and I had this conversation with my students quite a lot, and actually Brock and I talk about it a lot too, that a solo pianissimo is not a pianissimo. It is like forte in the style of pianissimo. Like, we play the bassoon, like, that instrument, it needs to project, and especially if, you've got something which is not only needs to be heard by the audience, but it needs to be utilized by your colleagues to get a fuller picture. I've never understood, actually, even with students. We had a student last year in New Zealand who she just wanted to play everything so softly and beautifully, and I was like, honey, that is lovely, but I can barely hear it, and I'm sitting right next to you. I need you to open that reed and just sing it, and even if you might not, like, I remember when I am famous for like my ability to play bucking pianissimo, but sometimes that's actually not super helpful. I'm just like, obviously in Brahms' Violin Concerto, yes it is, like, that just has to be super solid and pianissimo with integrity. That's what I mean. If you're going to do a pianissimo, it needs to have integrity. Like, I mean, and that's taken me. I've taken me a long time in my career to figure that out. And that's okay. Like, I hope when I get to 60, I figure out something new, and I'm just like, woo, let's do it.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a good point, Colin, and how, just that context is so important, and keeping that understanding and knowing. And it does take just experience and doing it and learning and saying, nope, that didn't work, or that wasn't together. And so I appreciate you sharing about that.
Well, it's also really hard as well, because you might have someone sitting next to you, or you might have a conductor, I'm not going to name names, Sir Andrew Davis, but he really is just like, he is just like bassoon, like, seen and not heard, please. Like, it's always just like, and he conducts like this where he conducts us, and I'm just like, Sir Andrew, like, we have to blow through 2 meters of piping here. Like, I think we need to create some sort of sound. Yeah, anyway, I don't mean to bitch about Sir Andrew, love him, but yeah. He's got very strong feelings about, like, dynamics. And I guess as orchestral musicians, I know that the age of the tyrant maestro is kind of, done now that orchestras are sort of taking control of who stands in front of us. But also they do have a strong, good conductors. They know what they want. And we've got to try our best to facilitate that. If there's, I personally don't really like that really big, nasty, loud sound personally. But like if I've got a conductor who that's their ticket, and that, you know, I don't know, like doing Pines of Rome or something, and, you know, sometimes I'm like, actually, yeah, but I mean, it hurts, but it's good. But yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, and this is probably the hardest thing as bassoon players, is we need to have reeds. We need to be set up so that we can basically do it all. And therein lies like a whole nother tale of stories.
Yes, having the, you know, low reed, Chike 6 reed, right reed.
Yeah, no, the Chike 6, that's that glorious Chike. I've actually got a box, like, yeah, that is like the all-rounder, you know, and I struggle because I always want to sound like that. I'm like, those reeds are epic, but I actually have to stop myself. I'm like, do not take those reeds out, Colin. You do not need those reeds today. Like, you're not doing Chike 6, you know?
And it kind of ties into the next question I wanted to chat about and ask you is about freelancing, the pros and cons about freelancing.
Well, I mean, I've never had a job, like a tenured position, so I don't know I can't compare it to that. I mean, I am quite self-aware and I am quite observant of people around me, obviously, and I work in orchestras where most people are tenured musicians. But yeah, okay, so freelance. The pros of freelance. I mean, if this is what you like, and this is what I like, is that I love new people and I love different people. And it took me ages. I used to, like my best friend Adam in Perth, he's always been envious of my career. He's just like, I wish I could just like fly to Melbourne and then fly to New Zealand and go on a tour with the New Zealand Symphony and then go to Christchurch Symphony and play a ballet. You know, he's like, that sounds great. And I'm just like, yeah, I mean, you know, we forget sometimes. And it's funny because the freelance career is not really like, it's not talked about enough as like something that it's got, you know, there's pathos to being free. And there's something actually quite special about, for me anyway, it's not that I dearly like to be liked, but I kind of do. And I like that orchestras like me, you know, and that I can go and play with different orchestras. And you can sort of, I mean, I'm not going to say I pick and choose because I don't really, but I guess I can decide where I want to be. And, you know, like somewhere like Melbourne has two full-time orchestras, and so you can do a lot of the, you know, the big symphony repertoire with the MSO, and then if you've got a month or so off, you can see what the opera and ballet orchestra are doing. And, you know, I mean, and actually Brock, who we talked about a lot the other day, he has always said, you know, how he feels like because he's in the Melbourne Symphony, he doesn't get to express himself within the confines of opera and ballet, which is, it's such a special thing, you know, like it's such an important part of being a musician. I mean, ballet, comme ci, comme ça, you know, like I just wish, you know, after 3 hours of dancing around, they just tell each other what they want. But the music's great. But opera is the shizzle. You know, the expression of the human voice and just sort of I don't know. I'm a theatrical person. I'm just like, the theatre of opera is excellent. Love a diva. I love a wailing soprano. Like, yeah, I feel really lucky that in my career as a freelancer, I've been able to have such diversity. And I mean, the other thing as well is that in Australia, you know, there's a lot of like, sort of, you know, the last 20 years, I guess, orchestral music has sort of moved into that sort of like, let's like try and, what do they call it, Julie? It's like, you know, trying to do the pop concerts and like, you know, crossover gigs, you know. It's a little bit demeaning to call it a crossover gig because we're not just, it's not really that, but they're really fun, you know, like getting to do all the like the big arena shit with, you know, the stars that come through and the ups and downs and the hoo-ha of all of that. But yeah, what else can be a pro and con?
I guess it's like pops, or just because I'm thinking in the States, we just have like different series, you know, or I guess that's how I would describe it too, Colin.
Series. Yeah, right. Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, the Melbourne Symphony do that, and they also, like, I love the films as well. I mean, I shouldn't say I love the films. I do not like The Lord of the Rings. If I have to go bump, 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 bump for another 10 minutes, I'm seriously going to cause a scene. But yeah, doing the John Williams movies, you know, like, they're so much fun. Yeah. I am just going to say it. Like, okay, so I used to be really bad at just being like, what's going on? What's happening up there? Like,
yeah, I want to see you.
Yeah, I want to see. I want to watch. Like, Jabba the Hutt's here. He's my babe. I'm like, oh, Jabba. Yes. Anyway, they started telling us, oh, you can't do that. Like, you can't just turn around and gawk at the screen. I was like, oh, that's not fair. So anyway, we've decided, and I'm not going to say where, but I now have my iPad like on my yes. stand, and I just press play at the exact. So sometimes it takes me like 10 minutes, and I'm like, God, I've got to line it up. I don't miss anything, but I'm like, it's very serious. Jab will be on soon, and I need him to I need his mouth to move perfectly. But yeah, I love doing the movie gigs. But I guess like the cons of freelance work is the instability, you know, the insecurity, financial insecurity. You're kind of constantly on trial. Like I know that's like a really hard thing to say, and I've had to deal with like my sense of worth and stuff, like, and sort of just sitting in the fact of my comfort of knowing that I'm not constantly being judged by everything that I do, but you kind of are. But I guess that also like drives me as well, like not saying that like I'm fearful of it, but that I'm just like, I need to really take this, you know, to the height of what I can achieve, because it's really important to me and it's fragile. Like it's not a guarantee, you know. I guess the pandemic was really interesting for a lot of tenured musicians because, you know, they lost that, you know, security. And I didn't say to them like, now you know how it feels. Like my heart went out to them, but I did kind of feel that sense of gratitude and a shift of attitude and culture around how we treat our jobs, and that they are fragile.
Yes.
So I mean, you know, that's pros and cons of the pandemic as well. But yeah, I think it's mostly a pro. Yeah. And I mean, I'm in a super fortunate position that I haven't had to worry too much about. I'm not saying that I've like living in the lap of luxury here, you know, like, but I've been okay financially because I've had really supportive family, and yeah, I guess most of my pros about, you know, because a freelance career, it's like in New Zealand when they like legalize sex work, and you know, I was like, so they're going to tell high school kids now that they you know, if they're pretty and like kind of like a bit promiscuous, that they should become a sex worker. I'm like, do we tell people at university that being a freelancer is like also a goal, you know, like it's sort of like, so it's automatically seen as sort of this lesser achievement, which I really don't like. Right. I don't like that aspect of it, and I've definitely been put in my place a few times and reminded by, you know, especially by people who, as we talked the other day, who are super competitive, who still want to be like, I'm higher than you in the ranking of the world of the scheme of things. And I'm just like, that's awesome that you are, but like, do you have to make such a big deal about it? You know, like.
Something comes to mind, Colin, is the word freedom and like flexibility, and then also just knowing what you love, what I love. And so things that come to mind are like people and making those connections, and like and how we all have these different reasons of getting into music.
Depends, again, it's so circumstantial to where someone lives. You know, in Melbourne, you know, we have a whole freelance community, and the freelance community is super supportive and strong, actually. And I don't just mean amongst the Bassoon players, I mean amongst all the freelancers, you know, and it's there's people that run between different orchestras and do the pops gigs and, you know, do the music theatre stuff. Like, I mean, God, I'm so lucky living in a city like that. Like, it kind of like cements you as a person. You know, and it's harder in New Zealand because there's not as much work like that, you know. So we are really lucky in New Zealand, and like I always say this to my students, I'm like, you can always go to Australia, you know, like we can just move to Australia and you can live there. And, you know, Australians open their arms to New Zealanders. People think there's this weird, I don't know about in America if you guys know that there's this weird, I don't know, is it like a competitiveness between New Zealand and Australia? And I'm just like, oh no, that just
it's from our sport.
Like,
rugby.
You know, like I think
it's all
New Zealand and Australia have so much to offer each other, and, you know, especially for young New Zealanders. And I wish this had happened to me when I was younger, you know, that I had known that I could just go to Australia, and I'm happy with what happened to me. But if I could just have gone to Australia and gone to the Australian National Academy, which is basically this school where you get paid to go there, you get these amazing teachers, you get lessons once a week with, you know, the best people in Australia, all the guest musicians that come into Melbourne Symphony, Sydney Symphony, Australian Chamber Orchestra, they all come in and teach there. And it's basically just set up to create orchestral musicians. And we never had that in New Zealand. And I just think, you know, I don't know what the answer is. We don't really have the population for it, but it is concerning. And I know that you probably sense this too. How many young bassoon players are coming up through the system in New Zealand?
So
you know, it is.
Yeah,
it's
an issue. It's just yesterday was interviewing Ben, and he said in Auckland that this past year they didn't have any bassoon students go through the school. And here in Christchurch, it's not very many students. And so first, when I came here, I thought it was a financial issue with schools, because in America, we can, you know, a lot of the schools, and I'll speak specifically with Texas, that schools can buy.
Texas got some money.
Yeah, from football and doing marching band. So
what are you talking about? And oil.
Yeah. Well, in parallel, Colin was born in California, you know, with that area too. But we're high schools, like, and there are like tens of high schools in small areas, and they all have 3 or 4 bassoons, and we're all playing.
Yeah.
So here in New Zealand, because the music system is so different.
Well, I think the other thing, and Neville Forsyth, who we talked about the other day, you know, I actually heard him on the radio a couple of years ago. He was lamenting 2 things. He was saying, because on the radio they were making fun of the recorder, and, you know, like how great it is that schools in New Zealand, just so you know, Martin, like New Zealand sort of changed, I reckon about 10, 15 years ago, from everyone doing recorder at primary school to everyone now playing ukuleles, you know, because it's cheaper, and I guess they find it's easier and it's less nasty. Anyway, on our national concert program, they are making fun of the recorder and talking about how great that is. And actually, Neville made such an amazing point of actually the recorder was the soloist instrument of the Baroque period, so you can cut the crap. It's a beautiful instrument. And second, it is a massive problem that no one is playing the recorder anymore, because that was the natural progression for wind players, like oboe and bassoon players especially. That now we've lost that sort of anchor, that creation moment of making music at that young age, and then moving just progression. And I'm not saying that I don't play. I mean, I do sort of struggle with the recorder now. Louise always makes fun of me because I'm just how hard can it be? We were amazing recorder players, and then I'm just what's that fingering again?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's problematic in New Zealand that we just don't have those early foundations, I guess, and I wish I was less big picture and more grassroots, and just went out to schools and just right. I don't know. I just don't have that. I'm more let's do something about it. But yeah, I mean, I guess just talking about, I don't know the answer. Like, it broke my heart when Neville was so, like, he was so gutted, you know, like talking, and even just the attitudes around the recorder, like it's so toxic, you know.
Yeah, because it like you said, a seed. It was like the transitional, and it didn't even have to be a transitional instrument, but it was, that first introduction to music and making sound with something and
being part of a group. It's like very free, yeah, and it's such a diverse instrument. You know, you can do so much with a recorder. Like, you can't do, I'm sorry, but you can't do that much with a ukulele. And I'm not demeaning a ukulele, but like, come on, guys. But I mean, I don't know, maybe I should make it my life work to like reintroduce the recorder to New Zealand primary schools, like, and that would be a fulfilling thing to do, Julie. You know, like, because
it would,
because it is problematic.
Yeah, and well, too, the recorder is accessible. We're talking about accessibility to the bassoon. It's quite. It really is.
Well, I mean, that is. We can talk about the problems around the bassoon, like, and sort of.
Yeah, sure.
You know, how an instrument like that is just not. It's not accessible to lower socioeconomic background people unless they're part of like a school system where they can use a bassoon through their school. It is an expensive instrument. Like, it kind of, I really fight for those students. I've had students in the past who are going through university on an instrument that they don't own. And I just maybe even just give them even more than I would anyone else, because I'm just like, it is so important that we make this work for you, because that's so hard to not even have your own instrument.
Do you have any tips on how you found your joy in music or in life?
I'm quite a joyful person. I guess for me, the joy is, it's deeper than just happiness or like a positive thing. My joy is like a rounded, it's like the emotional connection, I guess, and the power that music has on me and the way that it makes me feel. You know, like, it's like my love for Nicole Kidman and as an actress, and what she does for me is that, like, she embodies a whole idea of a person, and she's so great. And I feel like my connection to music is quite similar. Like, I don't just want to feel happy and like lifted, and, you know, I want to have a spiritual connection. And I feel like, I don't know why, but, you know, and I guess scholars have been talking about this for ages. Why does music create these feelings and emotions in humans? And I actually kind of like the mysticism of that I don't know why, but it does. And, you know, it's what makes it worthwhile, Julie. You know, it's what makes it all. And I'm not saying that it's not joyful to or rewarding to play music at a really high level, but for me, it's that connection. I remember doing Mahler 10. Actually, it was Sir Andrew. It was the end of his cycle of the Mahler symphonies. I'd never played Mahler 10 before, the Cook version. And I remember at the end of that, in our last concert, I just had tears like streaming down my face, and it was just such a natural reaction. You know, I was so moved. I wasn't sad. Anyway, Natasha, who I sit next to, was like, "Are you a bit sweaty or something?" And I was just like, "No, Natasha. Like, I am moved by this, and I'm so. How lucky are we that we get to express this huge emotional journey, you know, in our jobs." I was like, it is. We should be preaching this at schools, so that, you know. But the problem is that there's a disconnect now with any sort of emotional understanding, that I feel like, you know, kids would probably be like, well, what's that? You know, how's that going to buy me an Audi? It's the connection. And I guess I'm sort of way more on that side of of the spectrum than like the sort of very technical, and I'm not saying that I can't do all the technical stuff. I can, but I think my experience and my appreciation of music is way more on the emotional connection side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess as a musician, and what I want, to encourage is that we have respect and understanding of both, and that, we do need one to achieve the other, but that doesn't also mean that the other is not like as of equal value.
About the competitive nature of our industry, how do we not make it about ourselves? Are there some alternative audition processes to consider?
Because I feel like the audition process is set up for competitive people to flourish. And I have a massive issue with that. And that's not just from my own personal experience of, the competitive drive. It's hard. It's a hard one, and I don't know what the answer is as far as auditions goes. I think, the pandemic has changed things on this side of the world. They're holding less auditions and, putting people on contracts. And I think sometimes, orchestras can sort of have someone there on a contract and be like, oh, yeah, no, this is a perfect fit, but this wasn't achieved by the audition system. So it's like, oh, what do we do? Do we just like get someone who comes in and can win an audition, but then are they going to be a collegial colleague? I mean, the audition process is super flawed as well, because it doesn't, you think about auditioning for a principal bassoon, at any point during that process, are they being assessed on their leadership abilities, on their ability to negotiate with the other wind principals and like roster their section, and to, it's just like
the human element.
The human element. And I'm not saying that it doesn't, that most of the time it doesn't, that people just figure that out, but sometimes they don't. And that can be hugely problematic and unsettling for an orchestra, and it also can be really upsetting and a damaging process for both parties, for the orchestra and for the person that's auditioned, if it's not the right fit, because it's a really hurtful thing to fail a trial, or I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I'd love to hear what other people think about the competitive, and I guess I am surrounded by people who have won jobs, and it's sort of like the culture in surgery. In America it's probably the same, but like surgeons kind of treat younger surgeons really horrifically, and like they work them really hard, and like they're just like, well, we had to go through that, so you have to go through that. And where does the chain get broken? Where it's just like, actually, why don't we just try being like nice and supportive to one another, and maybe why don't we actually start questioning this competitive drive, this drive to beat people, which is what I've always struggled with in my career. And I find a way to love those people, because I just kind of find a way to love everybody, but I do struggle with it kind of like hurts me as well. Like, it hurts me to see someone who is just so driven by that competitive vibe, and it is absolutely 100% set up by the audition system and by the colleges. And I don't know, because that's also a good system. We've got great orchestras and students are trained really well. So yeah, I don't know. I'd love to know what Martin or Richard think about it as educators and people that are sort of, I mean, the American system is kind of like, even when Jane, I remember, went to Manhattan, like her whole master's was winning an audition. It wasn't about being an orchestral musician. It was about winning an audition. And I'm just like, man, that's epic. I missed that class, you know, like,
I literally transferred programs because the first program I was at was that, and I had no interest in it, and I wanted to go someplace where I could do more rounded musical stuff.
Yeah, and so how do you, as an educator, do you talk about this with your students? Like, do you have an open dialogue about competitiveness?
Yeah, my big thing is I'm kind of on the boat of music should no longer be a zero-sum game.
Right.
In the current world with the technology we have, anyone can find a path in music. It doesn't have to just be the orchestra thing. If you want to do an orchestra job, great, but there needs to be a lot of other emphasis on other things. There's a lot of ways to be.
But what if you want to do an orchestra job, but you're not driven by a need to win it or to beat other people? Do you know what I mean? Because the actual job is actually the opposite of that. It's actually about all of us working together. So, I mean, is there conversations? I mean, I agree. There are so many other amazing things that you can do musically. But I am curious how we could potentially change the culture around this inbred competitiveness and this celebration of it, you know, the putting on pedestal of the people who win, who, you know, and I don't know.
I say we have a little bit of a problem here in the U.S. in that we start it in like the 7th grade.
You start
the competitiveness.
Right, yeah. America. I mean, Americans are by nature very competitive.
But I lucked out in having good teachers that taught me that when you're in the audition process, you're not really competing against everyone else. You're competing against yourself. Because the best player is not going to necessarily win. It's going to be the person who plays what they want in that audition. And you don't know what that is until
you I guess the only way for me, and I always think it's a bit rich coming from me, I've even won an audition, but I've done very successful auditions because I've presented myself the best that I can, and how I would want to represent myself. And so if I get a job from that, then you've won the lottery. You know, that's and you remove that whole like drive, I guess. So grateful to Jane Kircher that I just naturally, it's not that I knew my place, but I just knew from about 13 or 14 that I was second. I liked that, you know, I never thought, maybe that's why I've ended up being the musician that I am, that I just never strived to compete against anyone else. I always wanted to collaborate, you know, I always wanted to for it to be something that I do with other people rather than something that I do on my own. Yeah, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love orchestral excerpts. I love doing orchestral excerpts because I just like playing them really well, you know, I don't I guess for me orchestrally, two things, I love playing something Ravel Piano Concerto, and the whole orchestra is just wow, that's really good. And I'm just it's an orchestral excerpt. I've been doing this shit for 20 years. But I also love that it's a bit of razzle dazzle for a second bassoon. But yeah, I just love. Sorry, someone was going to say something.
Martin had a good comment there, as he knows Texas is something else, as Julie knows. For instance, last time I clinic the all-state wind section, top 4 bassoons are in the orchestra. 3 of them double-tongued like snakes. The kids are just remarkable what they can do. They're a professional player by the time they get to all-state in Texas.
Thank you for sharing, Richard, is the evolution of our individual intentions. So it's are we, and we talked about this in your interview, Colin, but it's are we going to this audition to prove that we are whatever better? That, are we going to win? Or are we going because we enjoy music, we love this orchestra, we've been listening to them since we grew up, or we have our friends in the orchestra and want to work with our friends.
Yeah, and then, and then how you deal with the pressure that you put on yourself for that as well, your intention, going into an audition and being okay, this could potentially change the outlook of the rest of my life. Or, you know, my partner is in this orchestra, or I need to live in this country. You know, like there's always things that go around in your head that are actually of value, that aren't driven by a competitive nature. You know, they are just practical, everyday things that are really important. And I guess for me, the ability to engage with those on a really healthy level and not let them, so that when you go into an audition, I don't know. Again, like, what do I know? But also, I kind of do, because I kind of do know what has worked for me, because I've had to really, I can't just go in there and play, you know, like I have to really think about how, before every excerpt, what my brain, how I sort of channel my energy into just that moment. And that's a really hard thing to do, but I've figured out how to do it. And like, so you can turn all of that off. And it sometimes takes that last audition I did, they actually said to me, can you please play number 42? And I was like, give me a moment. Like, I am getting in the zone. Like, you know, like I've got to, it was trying 6, you know, I was like, there's a lot that needs to be cleared from my head before I embark on this journey for the next 3 minutes, you know?
Could you tell us a little bit about your bassoon and anything fun about it that you love about it, kind of the story behind it? It would be great to hear.
My bassoon,
yeah.
Oh, my bassoon is so pretty. She is the prettiest girl. I play a 13,000 series Heckle. She's like a 1980s baby, like me. I've had her for about 10 years, maybe even longer now, actually. I've probably had, her name's Persephone, because we're bassoon players, so we've got to name our bassoons. It's very important to have your bassoon named, and it needs to be something very important. I actually did Sir Andrew Davis. Sir Andrew Davis loves obscure Stravinsky, and I'm sorry to say Sir Andrew Davis, like, it's so important, but that is actually how I say his name now, and I just forget that it sounds so fucking pompous. But anyway, we did this piece called Persephone, which is just Stravinsky work, and it was so cool. My bassoon had, like, it was a festival week, and it was like a great work as well. It's great second bassoon parts, but jazzy or something. But yeah, anyway, so my bassoon, I actually was doing an audition in Perth, and it was one of the first auditions I did in Australia, actually. And I was sort of at that young age where I actually didn't really care. I didn't think I was going to get it. So I just like went in there and played. Anyway, I didn't get it. My friend Adam won that job, actually. And like, what a great appointment. But the orchestra manager at the time was a bassoon player who, well, she had stopped playing bassoon because of RSI. And, you know, that was back in the days when I was a very social drinker. We were at the pub afterwards, and she was like, you know, I think, Colin, like, your bassoon kind of let you down there. And I was just like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. I love my fox, you know, whatever. And she was like, well, I've actually got a Heckle that I want to sell. And it was just perfect, you know, like it was just, and then not only that, but Gabby, who I bought my bassoon off, by me, I mean my parents bought my bassoon for me. I couldn't afford a Heckle bassoon. She then went on to become the orchestra manager at Melbourne Symphony, and so for her it was always so nice for both of us that I was there and like I was playing. Well, she always called it her bassoon. She's like, my bassoon. It's like, totally your bassoon, Gabby. But it's quite quirky, and I think it suits me. You know, like I don't know. I never really thought I was someone that would. I don't know what it's like in America with this sort of obsession with Heckle bassoons. I kind of pushed against it. I was like, I don't need that. Like, I'm fine as Colin. But I don't know. Now that I've got it, I'm just like, oh, it's kind of like, I don't know. It's like my Fox was like a really nice high-end Honda, and then like my Heckle is like a Bentley. You know, like it's harder to drive, but it like has. My overtones down in my, you know, like just my low B, it's like, it's epic. Yeah, it's a really lovely second bassoon. And Chloe, who I play with in Perth, they were bought at the same time. These bassoons, they came out to Australia. They're one serial number off each other, and they'd both been in the Adelaide Symphony, the players that had them, and then they sold them on. And anyway, they ended up with Chloe and I. And so I've done like quite a few weeks where these two girls who are one serial number off each other have been sitting next to each other. And Chloe and I struggle with each other on many levels, but we do not struggle in melding our sounds. We're just like, oh, listen to that.
Thank you so much, Colin.